And today, our topic will be making inclusion a reality. And for accessibility reasons, I'd like to describe who I am. I'm Diane Perry. I am a white woman with brown, well, actually I have brown hair, but I do have some hair coloring in there, so it looks a little light, some blonde streaks in there. And I am wearing glasses, and I'm wearing a beige and black striped top with a scarf that is has lots of tones of brown and beige in it, and it's all swirly and paisley through, and that's what I'm wearing today. So I am the one of the family resource specialists at the Peel Center, and today, as part of my position, I will be your presenter with making inclusion a reality. It's good to see some familiar names as well, so welcome. During our time together, please keep yourself muted unless you want to speak. Use the chat to make comments or ask questions, and Heather will be monitoring that for me because I'm techie, but not that great techie to be able to juggle all of that. So I appreciate you putting that in there. Questions and comments will be addressed during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session. I'll try and leave some time for that. And that'll be when the video recording will be turned off so that your questions are not recorded. And please refrain from disclosing personal details, and let us know if you have any accessibility needs or need help turning on closed captioning before the session begins. So I'm happy you're joining the Peel Center today. And the mission of the Peel Center is to educate and empower families to ensure that children, youth, and young adults with disabilities and special healthcare needs lead rich, active lives as full members of their schools and communities. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Peel Center, we are what's called a PTI, a Parent Training and Information Center. And what that means is that we are federally mandated in the law of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which says that every state must have a PTI. So we are it in Pennsylvania, and we are federally mandated and then also federally funded. So everything that we do at the Peel Center is at no cost for families and youth and professionals as well. And so we also are the family to family health center. So we also help families and youth and professionals navigating those special healthcare systems and mental health systems and things like that. So so we do a whole plethora at the Peel Center. I do invite everyone to visit our website. Our website has a ton of information on there for you to navigate, and to also outreach to us if you have any questions or requests. So today, I have the pleasure to be presenting this topic, and what we're going to be, hopefully by the end of my presentation here, and less than an hour, I'm going to identify how IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, supports inclusive education. I'm going to discuss the benefits of inclusive education, as well as explaining the importance of those supplementary aids and services, because without that, inclusion would be very difficult. I will also be showing a couple videos, but one of them will be touching on the importance of presuming competence in inclusive education. I'm going to guide the process of helping families have a vision of inclusion for their child, and then list the most important things that you might share at your child's IEP meeting at the next meeting. So I'm going to engage with you, and hopefully you will be able to share some of that with us as we go through the presentation today. So what exactly is inclusion? So I'd like everyone to think of a time, just, maybe close your eyes for a minute or two and think of a time that you felt excluded from something. And if you could provide in the chat, what comes up for you when you remember about that time? Like what kind of feelings maybe came up for you? And if you want to put that in the chat, that would be great. Okay, some feelings of being left out, being completely alone, isolated, having issues I could not solve myself, self-consciousness. Yeah, yeah. Unwanted, not picked to be on the team until last in school. I remember that. I was not the most athletic, so nobody really wanted me on their team. So I clearly remember that. Yes. Yes. So, and it's none of those are very good feelings at all when you're feeling excluded. So thank you all for sharing. So inclusion is a philosophy. All students are valued and supported to participate meaningfully with each other. It's also an educational practice, providing the right supports that will enable every student in the classroom to succeed. So today's understanding of inclusion is both philosophy and a practice. And it's important to understand that both the philosophy and the educational practices so that you can advocate for your child's team to implement the practices. And I had you go through that little exercise on the slide before, thinking about that exclusion, because as we move through these slides, hopefully you'll understand and get some tools to help you really think about how, like, if it was, when somebody shares with you that they've been excluded, what are the things that you might be able to help? So, like, if your child is not being included and they are excluded, then maybe we can work through that through these next couple slides. So, as a philosophy, this statement is part of IDEA in the federal legislation. And this is what parents already know and what they want everyone else to know. They see that everyone benefits from coming to know their children and learning alongside of their children, because disability is a natural part of that human experience. And we need to define the feelings associated with inclusion and also give examples of what it's not. And the examples give us opportunities, making us feel we belong, celebrating our differences, right? It's a sense of belonging. It's an appreciation of the student's diversity. It's an appreciation of their strengths, which gives them that equal access and opportunity. And the non-examples make us feel isolated, highlight our differences and how we're unequal. And it really focuses more on the challenges instead of those strengths. So here's a concept of, and some of you may have seen this if you've attended maybe different webinars or various conferences, and a lot of times this illustration is used. And these are visuals of what inclusion is. So imagine all of us are blue. We all share the same space and are given access to everything. Now, exclusion is that only one color is included. The rest are on the outer circle. Segregation shows that is and what it shows here is what happens when you are not part of the group. Instead, a separate group is created for you. Integration is being inside the circle, but still separated from the others. And some of you might be able to be thinking about, where is my child in maybe some of these illustrations, right? Now, inclusion is being inside the circle with all others, with the goal of all being a part of the social world in a universal manner that minimizes the need for specialized instruction or modification, but always making sure it is available as needed. We want all students to feel welcome because we live in a very diverse world. So our schools and our classrooms should mirror what our diverse world looks like. So just wanted to explain that a little bit there. Now, get us started. I'm going to share a video with Shelley Moore. If you've not heard Shelley Moore in the past, I highly recommend you to Google her and listen to many of her videos. She's got these 5-minute videos that bring about various topics. So with that, I'm going to open up for Shelley to talk about the evolution of inclusion.
Welcome to 5 More Minutes, useful videos in 5 minutes or less that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore. Today's topic is the evolution of inclusion. Okay, so you remember the dots? I know. I've shown you these before. But one colleague of mine suggested to me once, he goes, what if we didn't look at these as different concepts that we compare to each other, but instead as an evolution of time? It was totally brilliant. Now we could look at this timeline through the lens of any marginalized population, but to understand this timeline from the inclusion and disability perspective, we have to go back in time a little bit. Many of us know or are connected to someone who experienced institutionalization. It was even recommended to families by doctors. Although British Columbia was the first province in Canada to close down their institutions, there are still individuals living in these conditions across Canada today. The institutionalization movement is an example of exclusion. It separated individuals with disabilities from their families without choice. But the disability rights movement over the past 50 years, with the hard work of some incredible self-advocates and families, and maybe a little help from Geraldo Rivera, pushed communities to shift so that individuals of all abilities were welcomed and living in the same settings as their family and friends. This shift from institutions to communities, this was the start of the inclusive evolution. We have movement, but can we do better? Although many individuals are no longer excluded from their families and communities, they were, and let's be honest, they still are, expected to attend segregated schools or self-contained special education programs that are totally separate from the rest of the school community. And so parents started to ask some very good questions. You see, children with disabilities have siblings without disabilities, and families wanted all their kids to have equitable access to community-based education together. Kids started to be integrated into classrooms with their peers. They're in math together. They're in gym class together. They're eating lunch together. Kids are together. This is better. The shift from segregated to integrated schools and classrooms, this is the next step in the evolution of inclusion. We have movement, but can we do better? Well, this is where things get tricky, because integration, it doesn't take long to realize that just being together, it's not enough. Although in the same classroom, students with disabilities are often just that. They're physically in the classroom. They may sometimes have parallel activities, but mostly it's loosely connected classroom tasks. Now, you don't need me to tell you that just physically sharing space and time is enough to make you feel like you belong in a community. I mean, come on, there are Disney movies made about this. Breathing the same air is not enough. Do you remember the Titans? I do. The evolution from integration to inclusion is now the topic of many conversations in communities and schools around the world. How do we support individuals to be meaningfully included and not just physically integrated. It's not just about where kids go in their day, but why. What is the purpose to the places that they go? It's now school-based teams and staff that are asking questions about how to do this. How can we support purposeful and meaningful placements for kids with disabilities? In inclusive classrooms and schools, students aren't just present, but they have roles and responsibilities in their classrooms and also meaningfully connecting to their peers. This is inclusion. So there you have it, my friends. A brief history of inclusion in about 5 minutes. If this is interesting to you, though, definitely investigate your local history as well, because every community is in a different place in this journey, and it's so valuable to know where we've come from. The other thing, though, is looking at these visuals as a timeline. It really helped me to shift my own thinking from which bubble am I at or not at, and shift to more about where are we now in our inclusive journey and what's our next step. All of a sudden, the goal of inclusion becomes action-oriented and just feels so much more possible. We may not all be at the same place in the journey, but we can all move forward. We can do better. And so this is the question I'm going to leave you with today. Can we still do better? Do you think there's another evolution in inclusion? What might that be? How can we inch even more forward to make inclusion even better? Thanks, Geraldo.
Okay, so thanks, Geraldo, as well. Shelley had actually went through the timeline a little bit better, and I would encourage you to go through Pennsylvania's history of disability as well, and where we've come from in the 70s to now. We have landmark decisions like the Park Consent Decree, which is why we have local task forces in your in every intermediate unit. So there is your history. The history is really important in Pennsylvania, but like Shelley says, we can do better. And let me go through a couple of some of these other slides to help you, to help everyone, not just the families and the self-advocates, but also all the professionals that are supporting all of us in this evolution. So, LRE. Families value inclusive education because it mirrors our communities. People with disabilities are part of the diverse makeup of any community. As an adult, there will be no separate systems or stores or movies, religious communities, recreational centers for people with and without disabilities. It's all inclusive. There are, I remember somebody when because I wear the hat of a parent of a young man who was born with a disability. So, and I remember somebody telling me very early on when I was advocating for my son, there is no special education McDonald's, all the McDonald's, everybody goes to McDonald's, right? Or, at some point, hopefully you do. But there are, so that just has the point of, that the schools should mirror our communities. There are no average learners in schools. There are kids of very diverse backgrounds, understandings, skill levels. All kids learn at different rates, in different ways, and approach a task in a variety of ways. So there is no one size fits all. Meaning also that if your child has a specific disability, they don't necessarily, all of them have to go into a specific school or classroom that might be part of that person's disability. So LRE has been in the law since 1975. And there is what's called a BEC, a Basic Education Circular out there, LRE, BEC. If you Google that, you'll be able to see that history and how it was written as well. There's also in Pennsylvania, again, if you go through the history of Pennsylvania, disability and education, there's something, some of you may be familiar with, the Gaskin Settlement, which also spoke to LRE, and that was in 2005. And we do have fact sheets on our Peel website, so feel free to check out our website for some of that information as well. Special education is not a place or a placement or a pre-packaged program. Special education has always been a service for children rather than a place they are sent. So that's really important because that is according to the law of IDEA. And IDEA does support inclusion. The federal special education law supports a strong preference for inclusive education. As you can see, these words that are bolded on the screen. Although the word inclusion does not appear in the law, as you can see on this slide, one of the key principles of IDEA is the provision of a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. So anytime you're at your IEP meeting and your teams are talking about that NOREP, that Notice of Recommended Educational Placement, that should remind everybody that that the general education classroom is the first consideration. Can my child be included in the regular education with those appropriate supports and services? The law guaranteed access to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment to every child with a disability and mandates a non-discriminatory and appropriate evaluation for all children. IDEA also mandates participation by parents and students in the decision-making process and is clear about the use of specific procedural safeguards that need to be in place to make sure that the rights of individuals with disabilities and their families are protected throughout the IEP process and beyond. Now, subsequent amendments as reflected in the IDEA have led to an increased emphasis on access to the general education curriculum, the provision of services for young children from birth through 5, transition planning, and accountability for the achievement of students with disabilities. IDEA upholds and protects the rights of infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families. So there are key principles in IDEA. My favorite is parents should always be informed decision makers. Anytime I'm talking to families in my position here, I'm always trying to ensure that they know that they need to be, or you need to be, if you're a family member attending today, informed decision makers. And how does that happen? That happens by getting the appropriate paperwork before a meeting, giving you appropriate time to be able to review some of those materials before the meeting, so that when you do meet, you can be an informed decision maker. Now, if that's not afforded to the parent at the meeting, then sure, you go to the meeting, you're given that information, and then it's like, well, now I need to digress. Now I need to process everything so that I can be more informed before I make a final decision on anything. So that's a key principle in IDEA. Now, this is so important that within the IEP document section under educational placement, this statement appears. It is also important to note that the educational placement section of the IEP occurs near the end of the document. That means it's after the goals and objectives, it's after the specially designed instruction and related services, it's after the assessments, and all of those components are to be discussed without predetermining the placement. So I'm going to give everybody 1 minute or so to read what's on the screen. I don't want to have to, well, maybe I will read it for you just in case for accessibility reasons, I can read this. So, and again, this is on the section of the IEP. It is the responsibility of each public agency to ensure that, to the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities, including those in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with students who are not disabled. Special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of students with disabilities from the general educational environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in general education classes, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So, the key principle in IDEA speaks to these supplementary aids and services that I just read in that last statement. Those supplementary aids and services are required by the language of the IDEA to ensure that all children can receive that free and appropriate public education, which we call FAPE. And this also is specific to extracurricular activities with their typically developing peers, which means that any school-sponsored event, whether it be clubs or sports or a play or whatever the school is hosting, students with disabilities are afforded their supplementary aids and services, if needed, to participate in those extracurricular activities. There's also a process called, in Pennsylvania, called the Framework for Access and Belonging. It's called the FAB. It used to be called the SAS Toolkit. And I'm going to give a little bit more information on that a little bit later. But here is another statement around extracurricular activities and the supplementary aids and services. So, a statement of the special education and related services that will be provided for the child to be involved and make progress in the general education curriculum in accordance with subclause I, and to participate in extracurricular and other non-academic activities. So that is bolded. And again, this is in IDEA. All right. So this graphic illustrates the idea of the concept of least restrictive environment. The critical variable is the amount of time that the student is included and learning with non-disabled peers. Notice all students start as part of the whole. Every IEP team should start with the question of what supplementary aids and services can be provided in the general education classroom to enable the student to learn with non-disabled peers. There are times when an IEP team will decide that a student needs services outside of the general education classroom in order to provide meaningful educational benefit. However, the IEP team is required to explicitly discuss which supplementary aids and services could be provided in that general education classroom. So they must be considered. Now, there are 4 questions that appear in the educational placement on the IEP at the end of the IEP document. And these are questions for the IEP team to discuss. Now, sometimes you're discussing it throughout the whole, so you're sitting at an IEP meeting and, you're talking about, the different aids and services that are going to be helping that student in the classroom, right? You're going to be talking about the related services and some of the accommodations and the specially designed instruction. You're going to be talking about some of these aids and how they're helping the student throughout the IEP as you're going through that IEP. So at the end, you may have already kind of answered some of these questions, but it's important that you still could review them just to make sure that you didn't miss anything. And these 4 questions are to be discussed before determining the extent to which the student will not participate in the general education classroom. While we don't have time here to dissect each question, these questions are a powerful tool for ensuring that the IEP team is following the IDEA least restrictive environment requirement. If every IEP team truly considered these questions and acted accordingly, many more children would be included in general education. And I can say that because a lot of times when I get a lot of the IEPs, a lot of times though, that section of the IEP, it's not filled in. When I talk to a family, they're like, what questions? No, we didn't talk about that. So, I think that when you're thinking about inclusive education, this is a key component on that IEP when you're looking at these 4 questions on the IEP, because you're specifically looking at those supplementary aids and services and how they are helping the student to be able to be successful and having access to that general education curriculum and extracurricular activities. So currently, those of us who are thinking about inclusive education and access to the general curriculum have seen these shifts in educational programming in some schools and classrooms and would like to see them in other schools and classrooms, kind of like Shelley Moore. What more can we do? Can we do better? Where can we do better? Families and parents have really good instincts, and many of you might have started out thinking that some or all of these things should happen for your child. But maybe in conversation as you're reviewing IEPs and you're talking with your school team, didn't necessarily support you in that. And so you might have advocated for that your child so you might have advocated that for your child, but maybe you still need to advocate for them. But it is important to understand that these practices should be in place for all students. So regardless of the setting and programming, even if the IEP team decides that at this time, the student should not be educated in the general education classroom 100% of the time, they should still be engaged in school schedule and programs similar to their peers. They should be expected to learn challenging academic content, and all students should have an IEP that includes both academic and individual goals with a clear description of how that access to the general education curriculum is going to be provided. And all students should have access to instructional materials, communication methods, assistive technology that will promote active and meaningful engagement. Think about your student or another student you know, and if we ask these questions, is that child engaged in a school schedule and program similar to their peers? Is the child expected to learn challenging academic content? And how might you respond to that? Take a minute and think about that. Now, for teachers who need to make links to the big ideas of general education curriculum, Pennsylvania has developed tools to support them, including alternate eligible content that provides guidance for teachers on instructional content that is both challenging and appropriate for students with complex needs. In the past, teachers would have to identify links or learning targets aligned with the standards. Without guidance, some teachers might select targets that are more closely aligned to the standards than others. Okay. I'm watching my time because I want to make sure I get all this information to you and then also leave some time if there's questions. Now, presuming competence. This is a key foundation for effective inclusive classrooms. Presuming competence is a perspective change. It alters of how we start the conversation. Think of a student you know and maybe write down in 3 words that describe that child. You may or may not have paper handy, but think about it. Write these things down. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to share this video with you about presuming competence as you're thinking about that. So bear with me. I have to stop sharing and then share again to get to that video.
I feel like it's so crucial not to underestimate people with disabilities, because we can never guess what's inside. And there are students who have such potentials, and students who might make a little progress that makes a big life change. And I think we can't know that even though this student didn't learn to read, because I've tried to help him learn to read, he developed just this joy of story listening. And that enriched his life. Because we tried to write, we built his vocabulary. And so now he understands more things we talk about. He never became a writer, but his life was enriched in the trying. And so we can't underestimate, and we can't stop trying, because we just never know where this journey is going to take us. And we never know what we're going to find along the way that we never expected. It takes us in a different direction sometimes. And we didn't get to Banff, but we found this other place that was pretty darn neat. So keep trying, and you'll get somewhere cool, and you will have progress, even if it wasn't exactly what you're expecting.
So I want to thank Dr. Caroline Musselwhite for that video. It's really important, right? Keep on trying. Presume that competence. And it might not happen right now, right then, but you never know what can happen in the future. So let me talk about access to the general curriculum. Oops. I'm not sure where that music is coming from. Oh, wait a minute. I think I have to stop that video. Sorry about that.
All good.
There we go. I told you earlier I wasn't always that techie, right? All right, now let me find my PowerPoint again from the current slide. All right, so let's talk about access to the general curriculum. And having access to that general curriculum is a requirement of IDEA. So having access, so if the student is not within the regular education classroom, if they're in a different setting, how are they having access to that general education curriculum of their peers? And that's the most, and sometimes that it takes time to really think about that. Again, there are lots of tools in Pennsylvania. There are lots of resources out there. We just need to utilize them. PATN, the Pennsylvania Training for Technical Assistance Network, is amazing for providing a lot of the guidance around how you can do this. So here are some links. Everyone that signed up for this session today will get a copy of the PowerPoint. So you'll be able to have the live links for this, but here are some helpful tools for a successful inclusive classroom. And the first one is just Universal Design for Learning, which is it's not special education. It's just a universal design for learning and how you teach all students. The second bullet is that framework for access and belonging, which I spoke about that a little bit earlier. That is through PATN, however you want to say it. They have it on their website. It is a process that you go through as an IEP team, that everybody's involved in that process. It's not an IEP meeting. It's a process where you're really looking at the student and you're really focusing on those strengths. And then you're focusing on, how does that teacher teach? What is that curriculum? What is, and you look at all these various factors, and then you're working as a team to really come up with some creative and good ideas in order to help that student have access to that general education curriculum and or possibly be more included within the classroom. There's a strength and strategies profile by Paula Cluse. She's amazing. If you go to her website, she's got a whole other plethora of all kinds of great information on her website. And then also on the Peel Center website, we have handouts, we have booklets that are out there for you. That we have 2 booklets: strategies for creating inclusive classrooms for all students, and then 5 strategies to ensure an inclusive placement for your child. So if you go to our website on that link, you'll be able to download that booklets and or outreach to us, and we will always put one in the mail to you. The one I didn't put on this slide is the swiftschools.org, and that's Swift, SWIFT, schools.org. That is a national K-8 center that provides academic and behavioral support to promote the learning and academic achievement of all students. So that's another resource that would be out there for you, the Swift Schools. Now, what does the research say? Because, right, sometimes I remember when David was in school and I'd be talking about inclusion and he'd be like, well, what's the research say? What's the research say? Well, the research is good out there as far as inclusion. And what you hear and what you will find in the research is that students with disabilities who are included have higher academic expectations. They're thinking about going to college. They're actually going to college, whether it's in a higher ed inclusive program at a college, or just attending all classes for credit. There's a greater performance in all the academic areas, not just for the student with the disability, but also with the students without disabilities, because their education is being enriched when they're having the various diverse classroom in there. There's more independence with better school outcomes, increased social interaction, and all of this is in the research. Now, keep an eye on the IEP implementation. This really should not have, I really shouldn't have to say this, but an IEP should not have the same goals and objectives from year to year. If the child is not making progress on an IEP goal or objective, what we should not do is continue to teach the same way and not see progress. So that progress is really important. Those progress monitoring reports are really important. That is why we have IEP monitoring, because you need to review that. What do we need to change? How can we teach differently? These are all the things that need to be considered as the student is learning. What might work better? Is there a different time of day or strategy for instruction that would work better for the child? What exactly is the progress report showing around the progress? And if you don't see progress, do we need to change the specially designed instruction that's happening? Or maybe just change the goal altogether? And another thing you can do is to implement a communication system with the teacher. As families, you can ask for materials to work at home, review classroom work, and even ask, what are the big concepts we expect our child to learn? What are the other kids learning in the general education classroom that are the same age as the student? So that's why it's really important to have the general education teacher at your meeting to ask these types of questions. So here are some action steps, right? I talked earlier about involving you. So this is where I really would like you to get involved. Now, when you you can do it now, or you can do it for homework, whichever one works better for you. But I would like you to leave with a few things that you can identify about your student. Whether it's your student, or if you're here as a professional and you can think about a particular student that you would like to have better supports for, think about that student and pull some information from what you know already about the student. Now, on the screen, there is another link to what's called a student snapshot. The student snapshot is a tool for families to use to write some things about your student. You want to talk about their strengths, their dreams, their hopes, all of those wonderful things that you want for your child. This can also be written as a vision for your child. And I talk a lot with my families. What's your vision for your child? What's it look like in a couple of years? What's it look like in a year? Think about this. You need to be presuming competence and thinking about what does the future look like. And it's really important that I expect everyone to have some type of, write 3 or 4 or 5 things down so that you can be prepared for your next IEP meeting to discuss. And as professionals, are we considering all the range of supplementary aids and services? And how can we make sure that families are being heard at their IEP team meetings? Are their concerns being written under the parental concerns section of the IEP? And how can we help others in the school understand the value of inclusion? Because not everybody may really understand that. A teacher might, an administrator might, but maybe some of the people, the specials or, whatever it might be. But it's really important that everyone sees the strength of the student and that we can be able to optimize on that. So your homework is making sure that you're writing 3 to 5 things about your student so that you can share that with the team. Okay? Families lead the way. I'll go back to the beginning when we talked about the history. Shelley Moore talked about look at your history and look at the history of Pennsylvania and disability. There's a lot of archives out there that you can tap into, but families, you'll see that families have always led the way. Family is also the constant in the child's life. That's the other thing I share with families when I'm talking with them. Like, you have your child all the time. The teachers and the professionals that support your student, they only have your child for a snippet of their life. So it's really important that your voice is heard, the child's voice is heard, and that they're presuming competence. Because if families don't act today we have to act and continue to act. Like Shelley says, how can we do better, right? How can we continue to break down these barriers for our students to be equal partners in school and be equal partners in the relationship with our educators that are educating our students and working together? And that's how I would like to end our session today, is kind of talking about how can we do better. I love how Shelley said that in the video. I think that's going to be my little mantra now. But here's where we'll stop. Just wanted to let you know that the Peel Center does have family resource specialists. You can go to our website and you can, online request to talk. You can call us, whatever works for you. Oh, I did talk about us being federally mandated and federally funded. So if you are able, if you have another a device like a phone or a iPad that you can scan the QR code on the screen and fill out our evaluation, I would really appreciate it. It helps us as we move forward in the work that we do at the Peel Center to serve our families and students and professionals.